Welcome everybody. Did you have a good lunch?
Yes.
Yeah? Good. Okay. That's important. But not too many carbs, right? You're not going to fall asleep. Thank you for being here. My name is Kelley. I am currently the Executive Security Advisor for IBM Security Systems. And I am also a 25-year veteran of IT security. And when I was younger, I used to really want to have more experience because, you know, when you're young and you're getting started, you need some 10 or 15 years experience, and you're like, oh wow, that's really cool. They must know so much. But now that I'm saying 25 years, I'm realizing everybody knows how old I am. So, you know, it's nice to have the experience, but you also get older. Okay, so we're going to be talking about defending against targeted attacks, or as I've been thinking of it, defense against the dark arts. For Harry Potter fans, we're going to give you a look. We're going to start out a little bit with IoT, Internet of Things, and ICS, industrial control systems, and security and trends in those spaces. So give a little bit of a level set, and some of the impacts on the drivers, because there are some things in this area that are really changing how we defend against the attackers. And we're giving the attackers actually more ways in, unfortunately. The more ways we have in to manage, the more ways they have to get into. I'm going to touch a little bit on our XForce Research, the latest quarterly report. XForce is a group of researchers at IBM that get to do all the cool, actually monitoring what's happening online, what the malicious actors are doing. They do research on malcode, for example. So we every quarter gather up their findings, and we share them for free with everyone. I'm going to give you highlights from this quarter's findings, but also we have it available out at the table out front. You can get a copy of that report. And then I'm going to talk about the attack chain defense, how the attackers are going through, what's changed about them in their attack chain, and what we can do and where we can defend against it. And then talk just about two different examples. Two different examples of customers that are success within organizations. So this one here is just the era of continuous breaches. If you take a look, starting, and I'm told not to walk in front of that. All right. If you take a look over to, I told you I paced like an animal. If you start at 2011, you'll see that this is the year where we saw more breaches going on, and we saw an increase in sophistication. Now, advanced persistent threat, sometimes people refer to it as, you know, it's a little bit of a buzzword. You know, whether you feel that it's a buzzword or you feel that it's a really good way to define attacks, I think that an even better way is to just look at the reality that our attackers are more sophisticated and persistent about getting into our systems. They're patient, they're waiting, and the attacks themselves are getting much more persistent. And sophisticated. And they're using multi-channels. I mean, that's really where it started out. What was the first, anybody remember what, you know, got sort of labeled the first APT, the first really popular one? Anybody want to, what was one of the first? Oh, that was an APT. The reason we got hit was that it was an APT. RSA? Remember that? RSA. And they said, oh, well, this is a really advanced persistent threat. But how did that start? So it's so advanced, it's so terrible. Right? How did the RSA hack start? Do you remember?
Email phishing.
An email. It was a spear phish, and I wasn't able to. I was at a different conference yesterday, but I wasn't able to hear Kevin Mandia speaking. But someone told me that he was talking about how spear phishers are so often the way. They are in fact so often the way. And so how advanced is a spear phish? Well, it depends on your. You can have actually some pretty well-written advanced spear phishes, but. You know, let's instead of just going with the buzz, let's really just call it what it is, which is increased sophistication from the attackers. They're getting better and smarter and using multiple channels. We are seeing a definite increase in the amount of information that's getting leaked out, and you know, we had 500 million records last year, data records at least. And I suspect when we count it all up again this year, I think that number's going to go up or down. Oh yeah, right. So what does this end up being? It's constant. Continuous. It's not, It's not, oh, hey, here's this like really scary breach that I haven't heard about. Here's this different attack. This is essentially, when you get up in the morning and you look at the news, right, what do you expect to see? A breach. Somebody, somewhere got breached, and we're going to be reading about it. And that's the reality of what we're looking at today. It's really not the way that it was back when I was starting and putting a network on the internet. The T1 line, it's very different. We have to just accept it. They're always there. They're always trying to attack us. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to get smarter and be consistently prepared, especially in critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure is, anybody looked at the DHS website about which verticals are considered critical infrastructure? It's almost everything. So you go to the DHS site, Homeland Security, when we talk critical infrastructure, this is not just energy and utilities. I've got a lot here about energy and utilities, but financial services is critical infrastructure. A good portion of retail in the manufacturing is critical infrastructure. Chemical plants, critical infrastructure. So most of us somehow or other are either in a space that's directly into that's deemed critical infrastructure, or we are partnered with or dependent on. So by partnered with and dependent on, I'm going to say back to energy, right? Because we really care about energy. If we don't have our electricity, we can't do anything. So this is just a little bit of a background on what's happening within the space itself. ICS Cert Monitor comes out with a quarterly report on the kinds of attacks that we're seeing. And what's interesting is that a lot of the attacks that we see in critical infrastructure look really, really familiar to those of us in regular old IT infrastructure. Brute force attacks were very popular on IP-enabled critical infrastructure systems last year. Brute force. That's kind of old school, right? We've seen that before. That was a very, very common kind of attack. We've also seen something else in the infrastructure space that I think is really important, which is the script kiddies and the cool kids are getting involved. And by that, I mean it's become something that's not just nation states being interested, not just hacktivism, but also it's become a little bit of a point of pride to show that SCADA, PLC, that these are all vulnerable. And two examples of this are the Project Basecamp Research, which they were calling, the folks that ran the research project around it called it the fire chief moment for SCADA, because they went out very specifically to prove, no, SCADA isn't secure. Your critical infrastructure is secure. ICS PLC not necessarily secure. And they went and did a basic attack on a set of systems. They found out that they could actually very easily turn over these systems that were tied into OT management networks. So what do I mean by that? In some cases, an example, and I'm not saying they got one of these at Project Basecamp because they didn't always say exactly what they turned over, but for example, if you had an IP-enabled control to your nuclear power plant, then, and that has the ability to change the temperature of the core, then that would be what would be available in an attack like this, right? So I mean, this is not insignificant kinds of activity that attackers are trying to get in. So what Project Basecamp proved was that you can, many of these systems that are IP-enabled can be brought down very easily, and in some cases can be accessed very easily to get login for. Now, the other thing up there that's of interest is SCADA Strangelove. Has anybody heard of this? This is an attack, it's like an exploit group, SCADA Strangelove. They've got an attack kit, and they have just an actual walk-through guide on how you too can hack SCADA systems. And it bothers me a little bit because it's called the shiny, happy attack kit. Like how to walk through an attack SCADA. This is really serious critical infrastructure stuff, but we've got hackers now that are creating exploit kits and having fun with it. And that's a little bit disturbing because what you'll find is that the very motivated, smart attackers come up with these kits, and then you find them kind of like, gee, I don't know, I just want to learn how to hack types. And if they see, oh, here's the shiny, happy kit, then they start following down that path. So you get more of a target, you get more kinds of attacks. So not only are we seeing this increase, but we're also definitely seeing, in the actual attacks themselves, we'll also see an increase in the attack type of activity. And here's another example of exploited scalables take full control of the critical infrastructure, and that one came out of I don't remember where that one came out of, sorry. But anyway, so just some examples from the headlines of the different kinds of systems and attacks that are happening. So this is real. I don't want to FUD anybody. You know what? It's not about fear. It's about being realistic. And the reason that I do talk about that slide, and I do present that, is again not to be frightening, but because I have very often talked to companies that really feel that they have such complete and utter separation between their operational or protected part of the network and the informational, internet-facing part of the network, that they really feel that there's no vulnerability. And in many cases, that's just not right. So it's really more about level setting, that there are issues we need to take a look at. Anybody here ever talked to a CISO that said, if you said, hey, how's the security of your system? And they said, it is 100%, I am completely on it, no problems. You ever had? And I've talked to a couple of okay, so some people are thank you, because I hear that, and I'm like, I wish when I was head of a network that I felt that way, because I was always a little bit like, good. Yeah, but there are definitely some CISOs that think that they don't know what they don't know. So that slide's really to talk about these attacks are out there, they're real, and these systems are being targeted. So some other things that are critical in this space is that the profile is changing rapidly from a risk side. Looking at the migration to the IP networks from the OT, so really IP enabling remote access and opening that up and allowing remote contractors in, because these are really critical. Does anybody remember when the Russians hacked the US water system? You do, okay, you remember. Yeah, do you remember what the footnote, so lots of headlines, right? I mean, it was everywhere. The US water system has been hacked by the Russians. Do you remember the follow-up to that? What the sort of almost the punchline was?
No.
Don't feel bad, because for all of the headlines we had around the Russians hacking our water system, the retraction in the actual story was like in this tiny print covered in like 1 or 2 places. So you almost had to know to go looking for it. So why did that get retracted? It got retracted because we did in fact have, I think it was in Ohio, we had a water pipe fail. And the water system was not working properly. And when they went and investigated, they found out that an IP address from Russia a couple months before had gotten into remote access for control of that water system. Now, they didn't know what happened with the IP address from Russia getting in, and if it had anything to do with the failure on the pipe, but they did connect those two. And that's how we got the headline. Okay, what actually happened? What happened was a pipe rusted out. Anybody here have a house? Right? Yeah, okay. So a pipe rusted out, this happens. So that was one thing. But what about that IP address from Russia? Because there was, in fact, a contact from Russia. It was the guy who was hired by that public utility, the water company, to set up their remote control, their admin access, and he had remote control, and it was legitimate remote control. And guess what else he had? He had in-laws in Russia. And he had gone and visited his in-laws in Russia, and he had to do some general maintenance on the system, so he went in and did his general maintenance on the system, right? And that's how he ended up. So good and bad stuff, but IP enabling these networks for very good things, and what he did was legitimate work, but it also means that we can get nervous when we hear that we've gotten access from places we may not expect, and quite frankly, that could have been illegitimate access. That could have actually been some attack, or it happened to not be in this case, so it's a different story, but the reality is you can log in from Russia to that system. So that's changed things quite a bit again from the profile. I'm sorry, my ears plugged. I've been flying a lot, so I sound very weird to myself. Dedicated systems. Anybody here? here work with, in a controlled network, work on the OT side, work with SCADA or with PLC? Yes. Okay. So do you have a regular patching cycle that you do on all your SCADA systems? You do? Okay, and is it as frequent as you would have on the IT side? Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's very rare, and thank you, and I don't want to put you on the spot anymore. It's very rare to have the exact same level of patching and maintenance in your SCADA or your PLC. In fact, if you look at after the fact, sometimes when an attack happens, so after Stuxnet, for example, it can take quite a while for your vendors to get the patches out to you. So you may have a great patch cycle, but how are your vendors doing in getting you patches in a timely manner? They may not be doing that well. Now, you may think, well, gee, come on, vendors, get with the programs. What's the problem, Siemens? Why aren't you getting the patch? This actually touches on something else that's very important in critical infrastructure, which is the most important thing. When we think about security, as security people, we think about three basic tenets, right? We almost live and breathe by this. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. But when you're looking at critical infrastructure, availability is number one. Right? You need to have it. Yeah, you need it to be confidential, but availability, this is what really, really matters. Right? The electricity isn't available. If I can't get you out, if availability isn't there, uptime isn't there, that's a huge problem. So what happens very often when you patch a system really quickly and you haven't done all the testing that you could possibly do with that system? Anybody, I've been through it. Bad patch, right? You get a bad patch and all of a sudden your critical systems go down. What just happened to Apple with iOS 8.01? Right? Whoops, let's take that right back. You can't get to your code? Okay, yeah, we'll just, right? So, I mean, it still happens, right? Even when it's well patched or well tested. So, that's another really important thing as we're looking at critical infrastructure is the availability issue and trying very hard to make sure that we always have access to the systems, and that actually creates a different kind of risk problem because these systems aren't always patched. They're not always patched frequently. If we do patch them, we may have an availability issue, and again, we're IP enabling this stuff, so it's really, really changing the, I keep going in the wrong direction, changing the model. Some other things as you looked at the impact scenarios, I talked about reliability, availability. Safety can be very, very major in critical infrastructure, especially when we're talking about energy and utilities, because this is a way to, what would be a great way to mess everything up on the street. Turn all the lights off, so nobody knows if you stop or you start or you go. Increasing the nuclear core. You look at a chemical plant. Right? What do they make at petrochemical plants? Plastics, fertilizers. Yeah. So things that you really don't want to. You don't want to have. The safety impacts are very different. This can be very much loss of life. In health systems too, we also have, again, we get into loss of life kinds of scenarios. I basically, after I was done being a network manager, I went into being a manager at KPMG Financial Services Consultant. And it was the early mid-90s. And I thought, oh my God, the world's banks, right? Like you can't have anything more important. We gotta secure these. We gotta make sure, because all banks are starting to go online at that point, so it was lots of fun. We gotta secure these because this could be absolutely, absolutely terrible if the money gets lost. If somebody asked you, what would you prefer? The brakes in your car failed. Your pacemaker was tampered with remotely by an attacker, or somebody cleaned out your bank account. Right? So it definitely the safety impacts and also the reputation with our providers. So looking at critical infrastructure in the Internet of Things, if we start over, this is just one example in the energy space. Starting on the far side, we're looking at the home devices. So what would be an example of a home device? I think it's a California company, actually. Google bought them. Nest. Yes. Nest. So a home device that can then actually talk to things like your smart meters. Smart meters being able to go back and forth with the power to the grid. So if you've got, anybody has solar? We're in California. Solar PV people? Okay, 2 of us. So with your smart meter, what you do is you basically use the grid like a big battery. But then the meter has to be able to go and give you the energy and to also credit you back the energy to the power company. So there's a lot of fun, and you may be able to 24/7 check your energy consumption, where you are in your energy model. So what does that mean for the first time now? That we have access into the OT side, because we can see, at least from a reporting side, right? We can see what the company, it used to be, the guy came around, looked at your meter, right? And then they used to have to come to my house. Come to my house, look at the meter, okay, leave. Now then they got to at least read it remotely, right? Now this is all completely live and happening all the time. And then going up all the way into the energy, the generation, and back into the billing systems, which is really critical, because we've got the financial and the IT side really starting to either converge with the OT side, actually networks converging, which scares a lot of people in critical infrastructure. When you look at whether it's manufacturing or whether it's automotive, looking at converging, or at least bringing a link together for these two. Because what happens when you link together networks?
Exploits can move around.
Yeah, that's it. The attacker, if you can get legitimately from one side to another, or view one side and another, yeah, then there's the potential for it. So you want to be able to be careful with the attack. So this convergence of this old and new between the industrial controls, our traditional operation side, be it manufacturing, be it energy and utilities, the Internet of Things, which is where we now want to take all this data and we want to bring it to our consumers. We want to be able to buy the energy back. We want to be able to monitor your pacemaker from afar. Right? These are things that are really good, right? And monitor your pacemaker and also be able to report up. Right, back to your doctor, back to the manufacturer. There's a lot of goodness in bringing together all this data from the things, whether they're embedded or in our devices. But it is creating a new risk model, and it's also creating a little bit of a blind spot, because at least in energy and utilities, when you look at how a lot of this communication occurs, it's then telephony based. So as you're sending all of this reporting, it may not be going over an IP network, it may be going over a cellular network or a telephony network. So how are you capturing all of that? We also still, believe it or not, in a lot of industrial control systems, we'll still have legacy modems. So they're still actually doing a dial-out. So, and uploading the information networks. So that's actually creating this side blind spot for communication. I talked about the car world and the cars themselves. Cars right now are amazing because they are definitely a thing and an Internet of Things, but they've got a lot of code in them. Now, anybody a developer here? Okay. So I'm gonna give you a number. It's a real number, but I was going to say a developer might give me some pushback on why this number is. I'll tell you why I would push back on myself. But all right. So 48.9 million versus 100 million. Okay, 48.9 million lines of code. What's that? Any guess? It's Windows 7. 100 million lines of code. Tesla? I think actually Tesla's very, so that's a great guess. It's a legacy, your average legacy sedan. Luxury, sorry, not legacy. Your average luxury sedan. So Tesla probably has more. Now what?
Tesla just hired something like 80 hackers to hack into
To hack Tesla, yeah. 100 million. That's a lot of lines of code to get wrong. Think of what we get in showing up with Windows, right? And it's hacked. Now, why would I push back a little bit? Because very often when you rate machine, so if it's embedded systems in the car, they may have very, very short lines of code. So that may be why you're getting a little bit, you might have that high a number, but you know what? I don't care how you look at this, we got a lot of software in our cars. We also have a lot of networks in our cars. And this is just an example. This came out of, this is from an auto publication, but we actually reuse some of this information to put in an automotive research point of view at IBM. But the most interesting thing here was there are 3 general different kinds of networks in the car, one being what we think of as connect. Right? It's where the telematics are. It's our GPS. It's what, you know, it's our console that we look at. Right? But there's also the critical components, so the controller area network itself. And then there's another one that's just for like the little tiny things. So the controller components here being things like your brakes. Right? But then also things like power locks and lights. So another network for the slightly less important. And yeah, did you know most of our brakes are in fact software controlled now? That always makes me a little bit nervous. Yeah. And then and they're linked together through these ECUs, these control units. Now, you might say again, just like we have with the IT/OT conversation, it's good. We're separated. We don't have to have these connected at all because really the telematics and your GPS, I don't need to have anything about your brakes. But guess what's happening to get even better experiences in cars? They're starting to share this information. And what might be an example? Well, let's say I've got a really high-end luxury car, and when I slow down or open the windows, I want the volume on my radio to change, or on the music, the MP3 player. Because we all know that, right? You're going along and suddenly it's too soft or too loud based on how fast your car's going at the windows. So decelerating could actually be something that you want to then alert the radio to. So now you're linking up this media network with information from the controller network. So we are having crossover in different places and also in the car. And we've got at least 3 networks in the car right now, and 100 million lines of code. So that's sort of the basic on where we are with Internet of Things and how things are changing and some of the trends. The XForce Research I'll just cover on Heartbleed. So you might be saying, we heard Heartbleed, right? Heartbleed's over. And Heartbleed is in fact actually, you know, the bulk of the attacks is over with Heartbleed. But, and actually, to step back a second, how many folks here had a Heartbleed issue? You used OpenSSL or one of your vendors? Used it? Yeah, most of us. Okay. And IBM too. we did too. OpenSSL was a really good library. And there's a lot of companies did use OpenSSL within one or others of their products or product they got from a vendor. So when Heartbleed was first announced, we actually looked, and this is XForce monitoring the system. We found that there were 300,000 attacks in the first 24 hours. So it really, really, really spiked right away as soon as it was announced. Now what's interesting about this is when it was announced, when the CVE came out. Anybody know how long the vulnerability was actually in OpenSSL? The vulnerability that the CVE was based on. So the CVE came out in April. Right? How long was that vulnerable nugget of code in there?
Years.
One that had the
Years.
Yep, years. So it was sitting there waiting to kind of detonate, and then they finally it got announced. It got announced with a logo. That gets me a little bit. I feel like, did you need to do? Couldn't you have had like more disclosure responsibly? But you didn't make it look. So one day we've got 300,000 attacks, so it really, really spiked up. But what's interesting is that even though we saw that spike go down pretty quickly, we're still seeing quite a lot of attacks. We're still seeing about 7,000 attacks a day. And it could well be that it's gotten into an exploit kit. So attackers, the thing about attackers is they don't care if it's old school. You know, like what was last year? What was one of the #1 most attacked vulnerabilities on the web? SQL injection. There's that blast from the past, right? That's well over a decade old. SQL injection, because an attacker doesn't care if it's old. They just care if it works. So they're still out there trying. So we saw a massive spike. We saw that spike very much in a distributed manner, but we are still seeing the attacks now. And the interesting thing about one day is that the one day really flowed very, very, very quickly. It was announced on April 7th, and already Mandy and our Transmedia announced the next day that they had an attack on a client, and the Canadian Revenue Agency already had attacks. So the attackers they went like that. They figured out how to code exploit, and they got it out there very, very quickly. Which means back to the patching. We have to patch really quickly because the attackers aren't going to wait. As soon as they know that there's a vulnerability, it's been sitting there for 2 years, but you put it in a CVE, and these guys go right out. The other thing that was really of note here is that it was a very, and this is all on that report that's free out there, is that they did it very distributed. So all the initial attacks, they really did this, and they basically probably took bots because we saw a lot of attacks from a lot of different IP addresses. So that was really how they went out with the launch. The other thing that I thought was really of note in this quarter is CMS, where the vulnerabilities are. Anybody use a CMS, a content management system, like a WordPress? Yeah, a lot of companies use WordPress. We actually have a blog at IBM that's on WordPress. So WordPress, great. These are great platforms. They're really good for putting out a lot of content, but they come with these plugins. And the plugins are little widgets of functionality. And if you look at where 90% of all the vulnerabilities on the CMS systems are, they're coming out of the plugins. So it's a good thing to note that you want to keep an eye on your plugins. These are generally open source. They're generally developed by a community. But something else that really stuck out to me, why I thought it was kind of cool that these were both in the same finding, is that what do plugins and Heartbleed have in common? They're open source. Yeah, they're open source. So that's what you should take away. Don't use open source. No, I'm absolutely kidding. Absolutely kidding. What I'm saying is that we're using more and more open source, so getting component lifecycle management and being able to manage and secure open source, I think, is going to be more and more important because this is coming out in CMS. We can see 90% of the plugins. But guess how a lot of your developers are developing their applications? With open source components and libraries. Yeah, this is not just a CMS thing. I think we're gonna see this more and more as the wave of how we develop software. So getting a handle on those open source components is going to be really critical. So I thought that was kind of a neat finding because you can kind of see, I think we can see a vision into the XForce 2015. We'll see if we can all come back next year and you guys can tell me if I was all wet or if I had a good view there. All right, the attack chain of how the attackers go. Anybody seen the original Lockheed Martin attack chain? Kill chain. No? Okay. So Lockheed actually has the original one. You often hear about kill chain. And I always feel a little bit of a couple minds when I look at something like attack chain, kill chain. I don't want to sound, we don't want to make it out like it's too, you don't want to make things overly scary, but on the other hand, there really is a cycle that these attackers are using, and it very, very much does follow this basic pattern. And as somebody who's been looking at and trying to defend against attackers for 20 years, the first 5 years I was doing IT, it was mostly just admin, and I didn't get angry until enough people had broken into my systems, and then I became much more of a security person. But this is really what they do. They hang out, they do their recon first, they figure out how I can get in. They may spearfish, they may cast a netfish, so they may, sometimes they'll just send a whole lot of stuff, but they start out with trying to figure out how they can get in. They're not necessarily trying to do anything malicious at this point. What they're trying to do is figure out how you work, how your systems work, get the topology. Did you guys look at the target breach? Okay, and what happened in that target breach with that black box? What did the attackers do? They understood the naming conventions of the network so well that they were able to configure the malware very specifically. Right? So that's why sometimes you'll see target was a targeted breach, right? But that's what happens. They did enough recon. They figured out who the HVAC folks were so that they could get those credentials. They took their time and figured out how they were going to launch a successful attack. Once you've taken your time, then the next thing they do is they start to really actually find the total, find here or there. Is it a plugin for your CMS that's got a vulnerability? Is it that marketing server that everybody thought, hey, it doesn't matter, it's just marketing, so it's fine, it's over there, it's serving up its stuff, and it's good, we don't have to secure it that much. Doesn't matter, they're going to look, they're going to go find out, is it that one system that wasn't patched because it was a dormant VM and when you were going through your patch cycle you missed it or something like that. That's what they're looking for. And actually a pen tester said it to me once, he said, I have the easiest job in the world because I only have to find the one thing. You got the hard job, you got to figure out the million ways to keep me out. And I was like, yeah, okay. But that's it, they're looking for that one way. Once they get in, they generally have this nice land and expand kind of reality. Once they've gotten a good pivot point, they feel good, secure, that they can look around, then they're going to start doing recon from a little bit deeper in, essentially, and figure out where else they can go, what other systems they can attach to. From there, they start to actually get the information, the gathering phase, so they're starting to take the data itself, if it's available to them. They'll start to actually grab the data. And then once they start to grab the data, what's the next thing they do with your data? Yeah, that's it, because that's their fun. Most of the time, in this case, it's really in this the targeted attacks, it's that they want your data. Now, there's another alternate to gathering data, right? What could, they could almost go on a slightly different path here, right? You've got access, maintain, and presence. What could be a distributed, an alternate path, a parallel universe? Take down. They may just want to really disrupt what's going on inside your system. So what can we do against this? Well, we really, they're slow, they're patient, they're targeted. We have to be the same thing in reverse. They're using a layered approach. We have to use a layered approach. I mean, I wish I could say this is going to be simple. I wish also that I could say, you know what, once we've done all this, we are good, and you can all sleep well at night, just, that's it. I'm going to go to the Bahamas and have an umbrella. But we can't, because we're going to get better about protecting, and they're going to get better about attacking. So this is what we can do for now, but this is a journey. This is not just a one-time thing. But what we need to do is we need to take a look at hardening all of our different sections and pieces and areas. So looking at endpoints, networks, applications, and the databases, and hardening them down. And I have some examples of the different things that you would do on these. So with your endpoints, get some sort of level of management. We all hear about mobile. Right? Mobile, but get some sort of level of management. How many people here have endpoint protection and manage all your mobile systems? So, you manage your brain. Yeah, a lot of people don't. Or you may allow access. Sometimes I ask that question and I hear, yeah, we've got all the management. I say, well, do you allow mail access from, access to your corporate mail from any of the systems that aren't managed? And they go, well, yeah, of course, we have web mail. Anybody can get a web mail. I'm like, do you have critical information in your mail? Like, yeah. Like, okay, well, maybe we got to rethink about the endpoint. So looking at the endpoints, your applications and your testing, that network traffic itself, you want to be able to get a handle on monitoring that. And then this one is often very forgotten, but a lot of our critical data is inside our databases. And we're not monitoring our databases specifically. We're monitoring the network. We may monitor the access to the endpoint, but we don't actually go and monitor the databases. Anybody here ever been a DBA, database admin yet? So if I say I want to monitor your database, what's your first thought?
Where do you work?
Huh?
Where do you work?
Well, I work at IBM.
No, I'm joking. No, I mean, yes, where I would ask. It would be a lot of it would be
Do you feel like it don't slow it down?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually, most of the time you ask a you say to a database admin, we're going to start monitoring. They're like, oh no, do not slow it down. So when you do that monitoring, you want to do it in a way that's more observational. It's not going to actually impact the traffic. You want to be very patient as you look for the attackers, and you're going to be patient too, because they're slow, and you need to also be careful to monitor them and to be aware that they're doing everything they can most of the time now to evade you. This is a very different kind of attack that we saw 15 years ago. Very often, they got onto your system and it was like, woo! Remember some really early viruses where they basically had confetti on the screen and stuff, and it was like, I'm here, you're pumping. Now it's the opposite. They're trying to be very, very, very stealth. So that means that you may need to look at some things that are very, very subtle. Back to our buddies at Target. did Target know in advance of the attack? Was there any warning sign at all to them? Does anybody know? So
I heard yesterday that they knew months in advance for
Yeah.
some scan.
Yeah, they did. They had an alert from one of their alerting systems. I'm not going to say the name because it wasn't an IBM. No, they did. They had a system in place that alerted them, and they didn't. And partly because you know what, the way it was tuned, that they were busy. Well, I can't answer why. I'm guessing, right? But they didn't respond to that alert for some reason. It could be because it was small enough, or they were too busy with other things, right? So looking at subtle changes can really be something important for us to look at too as we're defending against these attacks. So how do we defend against them? This is just a simple, quick example of looking at those different levels of protection I was talking about. Because here we go. Here's our classic. It's a spearfish. It's an email with a malicious link, right? And what do you have? You have some sort of ability to know that that might be a problem because you've got a threat intelligence feed. You're on an ISAC. Anybody here a part of an ISAC, information sharing? If you're not, you might want to look into, there's an ISAC for most verticals. And it's where you and your peers come together and you share information about the kinds of attacks that your organization is undergoing. So in retail, for example, they actually very often have shared point of sale stacks, and they may know things about their retail environment that would help their competitors. And it's a special place. It's like the Vegas of IT because when you're there, you're not competitors. You're actually sharing information, and it's outside of the ISAC that you go back to saying, like, shop at Target instead of Walmart. So the threat research and the information sharing and what you're seeing at the network layer, to look at the email with the link. And then going on from there, let's say that we've got, for example, in this attack, we see that they were going to try and leverage a SQL injection fault on our actual website out of that attack path. You can see that they were going to try and do something on the website. So here we've got, for example, getting that SQL injection error out of there with application testing, looking for warnings of attempted activity through the SIM, and then also the potential to put up an IPS or a web app firewall to protect against SQL injection. And then an example down with identity management is if you see anything anomalous with one of your identities, especially a privileged identity, that may be a trigger. It could be you got somebody who got phished, right, and now they've got some additional, you see some strange activity through their actual identity itself. And then the security analysis is really the biggest thing that you need to do, which is taking all the data from all the different sources and points and bringing it together into one spot so that you can start to get a real view into the activity in your network. Because back to that Internet of Things, back to the convergence, back to all these layers with the hardening, the endpoints. What is this, and our smart meters and our cars, what are we ending up with? A whole lot of data. I mean, tons and tons of data. And it's like this big data pot. So unless we have an intelligent way to sort through it and figure out what this data means, it's not going to be, it's a giant haystack. And we want to be able to find, and the haystack's just getting bigger and bigger. Hadoop is making the mother of all haystacks, right, for us. So it's just getting more and more. So we need to be more intelligent about the kind of analytics that we do on top of it to find out where those needles are so we can get those needles out, i.e. get the alerts, get the problems out before they find out where the attackers are starting to cause trouble. Because again, even though they're slow and they're patient, and that makes them harder to detect, it also, in a lot of cases, is giving us a little bit more time to detect them. So if we can be smarter about our analytics, we can see them going in the low and slow and bring that information together so that we can start to have an early warning system. So again, they're persistent, they're patient, sophisticated. We've got to be that way too and do it in a layered approach so that we can, first, we harden down our systems as much as possible. It won't protect us entirely, but at least it'll get some of the low-hanging fruit out of there. We get really good about detecting the changes or malicious types of activity in our network and on our systems. And then we analyze everything, not just to find out what's happening in real time or as near real time as possible, But also, we may find out after the fact that going back and analyzing their activity can help us to be better. It may show us where the holes were. So you also want to analyze if you do have an attack part of your incident response, should be going back through and analyzing. I do think that as we're looking at IoT, we're looking at this change in the targeted attacks as they're getting more and more sophisticated. The number one most important thing that's me, I ran out of time, is to transform your business. And it means to security and match it to what you're doing at your business. As I'm talking about this hardening and detecting and analyzing and bringing in more data, this isn't, don't go and rewrite all of your policies. And just because you're getting more Internet of Things, also don't go rip up your entire playbook. Right? Your business has a way that it needs to do business, and it has priorities. And the security model is really about transforming more to meet that. So take a look at where you are, especially as you're looking at these targeted attacks in Internet of Things and how your landscapes change. And look at what you can do, not to rip everything up and throw it away, but get that baseline and then figure out what you can do with what you already have and where you want to go in the future. And again, please don't think that this is a one-stop thing. The attackers are evolving, the technology is evolving, we have to evolve. So what you want to do is you want to put in place something that allows you to continuously change and optimize. You want to be elastic, you want to be flexible. As they get better, you want to also be able to get better. And I have two examples here. One was from a company where they started to actually take their identities. They linked physical and logical. And you're laughing because we've been talking about this in IT for a long time. Right? But that's what they did. So going out to the substations, they could see that where people were going, and they linked the physical and logical. And that's an example of bringing together IoT and intelligence to get a better view. And this one was about utility where they had substations where they were allowing their employees and contractors to just go out and log in with their own systems, and the systems weren't protected. So they did something fairly simple, but they said, all right, what we're going to do is we're just going to put an agent on there. It's a zero-day behavioral agent. We're just going to put it on your system. We know we can't completely manage your system, but this at least gives us the ability to make sure that you're not getting really malicious zero-day, one-day malware running on it. So just a couple of examples of what some customers have done. We have a lot, we write a lot, we do a lot of research. Here are some examples of some research around cyber, around critical infrastructure, around Internet of Things. It's a really big topic. Obviously, I could go on for a lot longer about it, but we would love to talk to you afterwards, or you can take a look at some of the papers that we've written at our XForce report. There's a link to it there if you're not in the paper, or we have the paper outside. Oh, and I'm going to get yelled at if I don't. Sorry. We have experienced the IBM security intelligence with Q Radar. Is this a demo, Mike?
It's a proof of technology, so it's a hands-on experience. You can come out, utilize the tool set, see what it can do, ask real-world questions on how do you do give a use case, and they can show you how to do it right then and there. If you get to do it, they show you how to, it's going to have laptops with everything loaded on it, so you can have an experience like it would if you owned it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and thank you very much for